noose, thick and coarse, swayed gently in the pre-dawn wind, a macabre pendulum counting down the last moments of a life deemed worthless. Below it, a young Lakota girl, no more than 16 summers, stood defiant, her eyes fixed on the horizon, not on the gallows. Ayana, a name whispered in hushed tones even among her own people, carried the burden of a world that refused to understand her silence, her slight, uneven gait, seeing only disability where there was profound, quiet strength. Her capture, a brutal snatch from the periphery of her tribe's hunting grounds, was a formality. The verdict, a foregone conclusion. Accused of witchcraft, a convenient scapegoat for a frontier town's unexplained misfortunes, she was set to hang at dawn. The air, crisp with the lingering chill of night, felt heavy, saturated with the townspeople's collective dread and morbid anticipation. They spoke in whispers of the heathen girl, their fear of her perceived otherness a palpable thing, a shadow stretching longer than any sunrise. Yet, a different kind of terror, a primal, ancient unease, was beginning to grip the settler community. It was a fear born of rumors of dust-choked trails and whispered warnings from terrified scouts. The most feared Apache warrior, a shadow legend named Nantan, was said to be riding. His name was a curse, a prayer, a desperate cry depending on who uttered it. He was a force of nature, a spirit of retribution, and his trail was said to lead here, to this small, forgotten outpost on the edge of the wilderness. The irony was a bitter taste on the tongue. A condemned Lakota girl, about to be extinguished by the very hand that encroached upon her lands, might somehow be caught in the coming storm of another, far more terrifying justice. The rising sun, a sliver of bloody orange, promised not new life, but an end, unless the impossible unfolded. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. Ayana had known the sting of isolation long before the soldier's boots had scarred her earth. Her silence was not a choice, but a veil, a natural barrier that separated her from the boisterous world of her kin. Words, for her, were trapped birds, fluttering frantically behind a cage of unspoken thoughts, their songs never reaching the ears of others. Even her own people, for all their wisdom of the spirit world, viewed her with a mixture of reverence and unease. They called her Ghost Whisperer, not out of malice, but because her quiet observations, her knowing gaze, often seemed to pierce the veil between worlds. Her grandmother, the tribe's elder healer, was the only one who truly understood, recognizing not infirmity, but a unique attunement to the subtle vibrations of the land, to the hidden language of wind and stone. Ayana remembered the day clearly, a memory now searing in its painful clarity, when the balance shifted irrevocably. She had been gathering herbs, her fingers tracing the delicate veins of leaves, when the sharp crack of rifle fire echoed through the valley. It was not the familiar sound of a hunter, but the chaotic, unnatural burst of a skirmish. Her limping leg, usually a minor impediment, became a cruel master, slowing her retreat, forcing her to bear witness to the unspeakable. She saw them, the white-faced men, desecrating sacred ground, their greed etched into their hardened faces as they dug for the gleaming metal that lay beneath the ancient burial mounds. One of them, a man with eyes like chipped ice, had seen her, a silent, half-hidden witness. He had raised his rifle not to kill but to capture, perhaps mistaking her for a child, or simply for a curiosity. The earth had seemed to tremble beneath her, not from the distant battle but from the raw, unadulterated fear that gripped her. She wanted to scream, to warn her family, but the words, as always, remained locked within, a silent shriek that only the wind heard. That day, the world had shrunk, collapsing from a vibrant expanse of freedom into the narrow confines of a cage, and now, the final fatal circle of a noose. The courtroom, if one could even dignify the dusty saloon with such a name, was a theater of cruelty. Its stage was crude, its actors a collection of hardened faces and self-righteous stares. The judge, a man whose waistcoat strained against his corpulent belly, embodied the very essence of frontier justice, swift, unyielding, and utterly blind to anything resembling truth or fairness. His pronouncements were not reasoned judgments but decrees, etched in the ink of an unshakable belief in his own superiority. Ayana sat slumped, shackled hand and foot, her silence misinterpreted as guilt, her stoic gaze as defiance. The townsfolk, a motley collection of farmers, prospectors, and opportunistic drifters, filled the benches, their eyes glinting with a mix of morbid curiosity and righteous indignation. Their accusations hurled like stones were a cacophony of fear and ignorance. "She cursed the well! My livestock died after she looked upon them. The fever swept through the children, and she watched from the trees." Each word was a nail hammered into her coffin, each hateful glance a thread weaving the rope tighter around her neck. She understood enough of their guttural tongue to grasp the depth of their fear, a fear born from the unknown, from a world they could not tame or comprehend. They saw her stillness, her unblinking eyes as something supernatural, something malevolent. They couldn't conceive of a spirit so bound, so unable to articulate its terror, its pain. The prosecutor, a slick, sweating man with a voice like a rusty hinge, painted her as a demon, a whisperer of dark magic, a threat to their burgeoning civilization. He gestured wildly, his words laced with a venomous conviction that left no room for doubt, no space for mercy. Ayana felt the weight of their collective judgment pressing down upon her, a suffocating blanket of prejudice. She was not a person to them, merely an embodiment of their worst fears, a convenient vessel for their anxieties about a harsh, unforgiving land, and the spirits they believed still roamed it. The silence she carried within her was now a vast, echoing chasm, swallowing every chance of defense, every plea for understanding. Whispers, like dry leaves skittering across the barren plains, had begun days ago. They spoke of a shadow, not of the setting sun, but of a man, a legend, an Apache named Nantan. His very name, a guttural breath, sent shivers down the spines of the settlers, even the most hardened among them. Nantan, they said, rode with the wind, appearing and disappearing like a phantom, his strikes swift and brutal. He was not merely a warrior, he was vengeance personified, an unyielding force against the white man's encroachment. Tales of his ferocity were told around campfires, in hushed tones over whiskey in saloons, each narrative escalating the terror. He had destroyed supply trains, vanished entire patrols, and left only silence and ash in his wake. The local garrisons, typically arrogant in their steel and gunpowder, now spoke with a tremor in their voices, their maps marked with ominous crosses where Nantan was rumored to have been. His arrival in this territory, so close to the small, vulnerable town, was an anomaly, a disruption of the usual patterns of conflict. Why here? Why now? When a solitary Lakota girl, seemingly insignificant, was about to meet her fate. The question hung heavy in the air, a silent, unsettling chord that vibrated beneath the town's forced bravado. It was a macabre irony. The fear of Nantan, the ghost warrior, was slowly eclipsing the fear of the young girl on the gallows. The townsfolk, so eager to witness Ayana's public execution, now glanced nervously over their shoulders, their eyes scanning the distant hills, imagining the silhouette of a lone rider against the rising sun. Their perceived security, built on wooden fences and hastily erected fortifications, felt suddenly flimsy like a child's toy in the path of a stampede. The dread was a growing thing, a monstrous bloom in the pit of their stomachs, diverting their attention from the grim spectacle awaiting them, replacing it with a far more primal, suffocating terror. Ayana's world had narrowed to the confines of her small, damp cell, the rough-hewn timbers smelling of stale sweat and despair. Yet, within her, a different world blossomed, one of memory and quiet defiance. She thought of her grandmother's hands, gnarled with age but soft with wisdom, teaching her the names of the plants, the secrets of the healing earth. She remembered the vast open sky, a canvas of endless possibilities, and the rhythm of the drum, a heartbeat that echoed through the very marrow of her bones. A tear, cold and silent, tracked a path down her dust-stained cheek, not of sorrow, but of a profound, aching connection to a life that was now slipping through her fingers like sand. She had known injustice, carried the quiet burden of being misunderstood, but never had the world felt so utterly, relentlessly cruel. Her disability, the silence that had always been her shield, was now her tormentor, a barrier between her and any hope of redemption in the eyes of her captors. She reached a hand, trembling slightly to touch the rough stone wall, feeling the cold, unyielding surface, a mirror to her impending fate. Dawn was a promise, a threat, a final curtain call. She closed her eyes, not in prayer, but in an attempt to imprint the last vestiges of her freedom onto her soul. She envisioned the eagle soaring high above the sacred peaks, its wings spread wide against the limitless blue, a symbol of liberation that she, in her earthly bonds, could only dream of. A faint, almost imperceptible humming began deep within her chest, a soundless song, a defiant prayer to the spirits of her ancestors. It was a hymn of resilience, of an unbroken spirit that even the hangman's noose could not truly sever. She was a daughter of the earth, bound by its cycles, and though her physical journey might end, her spirit, she knew, would rise, free and unburdened, to join the endless dance of the stars. This was not surrender, but an acceptance that transcended mortal understanding, a quiet, profound act of grace in the face of absolute despair. The pre-dawn chill clung to the air, a damp shroud over the town square. A morbid silence, punctuated only by the occasional cough or nervous shuffle of feet, had fallen over the assembled crowd. They stood pressed together, a mass of somber faces and hooded eyes, drawn by the grim magnet of the gallows. The scaffold, silhouetted against the nascent blush of the horizon, seemed to loom larger than life, a monstrous monument to their collective judgment. The hangman, a gaunt man with an air of practiced detachment, checked the rope for the final time, his movements methodical, chillingly routine. Every subtle shift in the air, every rustle of dry leaves, seemed to amplify the tension. A taut wire stretched to breaking point. The sheriff, his face grim, adjusted his hat, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd, seeking any sign of dissent, any flicker of hesitation. There was none, only a unified, albeit uneasy, anticipation. The town's collective breath seemed to catch, held captive by the impending spectacle. Ayana, led forth by two stern-faced deputies, moved with a quiet dignity that belied her young age, and the terror she must have felt. Her head was held high, her eyes still fixed on the distant, deepening hue of the sky, a final communion with the land that had nourished her, the spirits that watched over her. A low, almost imperceptible murmur rippled through the crowd as she ascended the steps, her limp more pronounced now, each footfall a heavy beat of the drum of destiny. The sun, a burning eye on the horizon, broke free of the earth's embrace, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and crimson, a dramatic backdrop to a stark, unyielding truth. It was a theatrical flourish, a grand, silent statement from the universe itself, declaring the arrival of the moment. And then, a sound, faint at first, barely a whisper on the wind, grew in intensity. The rhythmic thud of hooves, slow and deliberate, a beat that was both ancient and terrifyingly new. The crowd stirred, a wave of unease rippling through them, their collective attention pulled from the girl on the gallows to the distant, approaching sound. The first rays of the sun, blood-red and unforgiving, spilled over the horizon, painting the stark landscape in hues of grim foreboding. Just as the hangman's hand reached for the lever, a shadow detached itself from the edge of the wilderness, riding not with a rush, but with an unnerving, deliberate slowness. A single rider, silhouetted against the fiery dawn, emerged from the brush, his presence a stark, formidable statement. It was Nantan, the Apache warrior, his horse a powerful, muscled beast, its hooves kicking up plumes of dust that seemed to shroud him in an ethereal mist. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a wave of stunned terror that silenced the square more effectively than any command. Soldiers instinctively clutched their rifles, but no one dared fire, held captive by the sheer audacity of his arrival. Nantan wore no war paint, only the stern, impassive mask of a man accustomed to death, his eyes, dark and piercing, scanning the scene with an almost supernatural clarity. He dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years honed by unforgiving land, his movements efficient, deadly. He carried no obvious weapons, yet his presence was a weapon in itself, an aura of quiet menace that promised untold destruction. He walked towards the gallows, his gaze unwavering, cutting through the stunned crowd like a knife through soft cloth. Each step was a measured beat, a drum call to the inevitable. The hangman froze, his hand still poised, his eyes wide with a fear that eclipsed any sense of duty. The sheriff, his face pale beneath his grizzled beard, finally found his voice, a reedy whisper. "Who are you? What is your business here?" Nantan stopped a few yards from the scaffold, his gaze finally settling on Ayana, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a thread woven from a shared, unspoken history. The girl. His voice was a low rumble, surprisingly calm, yet it carried an undeniable weight, a resonance that echoed the vastness of the plains. "She is mine." The words hung in the air, a challenge, a declaration, and a mystery that deepened the terror engulfing the town. The air thrummed with a tension so palpable, it seemed to crackle. Nantan stood before the gallows, his declaration hanging in the silence like a storm cloud. The sheriff, his hand now resting on the butt of his pistol, swallowed hard. "Yours? What do you mean, yours? This girl is condemned by the law. She's a witch, a menace to this town." His voice, though attempting bravado, wavered perceptibly. Nantan's dark eyes, like chips of obsidian, narrowed slightly. "She is no witch. She is a voice, a path." His gaze flickered to Ayana, a strange, profound understanding passing between them. Ayana, who had been silent for so long, whose voice was locked away, felt a tremor of something akin to recognition, a faint spark of hope she hadn't known she possessed. The crowd muttered, confused by the Apache's words, by his inexplicable claim. "A voice? She cannot speak," someone dared to shout from the back. Nantan did not flinch, his focus unwavering. "Her voice speaks to the land, to the spirits. A voice that hears what others cannot, sees what others miss. She is a seer, a bridge to the old ways. And she is my kin." The revelation landed like a stone in the still water of the square, sending ripples of shock and disbelief through the onlookers. Kin? A Lakota girl and an Apache warrior? It defied their narrow understanding, their rigid divisions. The sheriff scoffed, regaining some of his bluster. "Apache kin? A Lakota? Nonsense, this is a trick. She's a danger, and you, warrior, are trespassing. Turn back or face the consequences." Nantan's response was a chillingly simple, yet utterly final statement. "The consequences will be for those who touch what is sacred." He stepped forward, his hand moving with deceptive speed to the hilt of a hidden knife. The confrontation was no longer just about Ayana. It was about ancient boundaries, about honor and survival, about a clash of worlds that had for too long existed in uneasy proximity. The true mystery of his arrival, the true depth of his connection to the silent Lakota girl, lay not in blood, but in a shared spiritual path, a purpose known only to those who understood the whispers of the wind. The standoff dissolved into a furious blur of motion. Nantan, no longer merely a silent sentinel, became a whirlwind of lethal grace. The sheriff, driven by a desperate surge of bravado, drew his pistol. But before the hammer could fall, Nantan had moved, a swift, almost invisible blur. The knife, drawn from beneath his buckskin, flashed in the nascent sunlight, a cold, gleaming promise. With astonishing speed and precision, it sliced through the rope that bound Ayana's hands, then severed the thicker one around her ankles, a swift, decisive cut that left her free, albeit momentarily stunned. The hangman stumbled back, his face ashen, tripping over his own feet as Nantan's shadow fell over him. Soldiers, jolted from their stupor, raised their rifles, but Nantan was already a step ahead, not engaging in a frontal assault, but using the element of surprise, his movements fluid and unpredictable. He didn't seek to kill indiscriminately. His purpose was clear. Rescue. He became a living shield for Ayana, his body a formidable barrier against the chaos erupting around them. Ayana, despite her limp, found a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct for survival kicking in. She didn't fully comprehend the whirlwind of events, but she understood the unspoken command in Nantan's fierce eyes. Move. Together they navigated the terrified, scattering crowd, their escape not an act of brute force, but of strategic disruption. Nantan disarmed two soldiers with shocking speed, sending their rifles clattering to the dusty ground, their faces etched with disbelief. He didn't linger to fight. His goal was the horse. Ayana, with a surge of energy she hadn't known she possessed, found herself running, her body responding to the primal urgency. They reached Nantan's horse, a magnificent, powerful creature that seemed to understand the urgency of the moment. Nantan hoisted Ayana onto its back with a powerful lift, then swung himself up behind her, his powerful arm encircling her, a protective cage. A single shot rang out, wide of its mark. The townsfolk, finally reacting, began to surge forward, a confused, angry roar rising from their throats. But it was too late. With a powerful surge, Nantan spurred his horse, and they became one with the wind, a vanishing silhouette against the vast, unforgiving plains, leaving behind them a town in disarray, its justice thwarted, its fear now multiplied. The plain stretched out before them, an endless tapestry of gold and ochre, the rising sun now a benevolent observer, bathing the land in a gentle, almost ethereal light. The sounds of the town, the shouts and the lingering sense of chaos, faded with each powerful stride of Nantan's horse, replaced by the rhythmic thud of hooves and the whisper of the wind through Ayana's unbound hair. She leaned back against Nantan's broad chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of her own. Her body, though still weak, felt an unfamiliar lightness, as if the heavy cloak of dread had been finally lifted. Silence, her constant companion, now felt different, not an isolation but a shared space of understanding between them. She knew without words that Nantan had not come for her by chance. His claim of kin resonated beyond mere blood. It was a bond of spirit, of a shared path. She understood now that her disability, her inability to speak, was not a weakness in his eyes, but a pathway to another form of knowledge, a deeper connection to the unseen world. He, the feared warrior, had sensed her spirit, recognized the echoes of something ancient within her, something the white men, in their blindness, had sought to extinguish. There was no direct conversation, no need for it. Their communication was in the subtle shifts of his weight as he rode, in the protective pressure of his arm around her, in the shared gaze they cast over the vast, liberated landscape. The future remained an open wound, scarred by the conflict they had just escaped, but it was also a landscape of possibility, uncharted and unknown. The terror of the gallows had receded, replaced by a fragile, nascent hope, a quiet promise carried on the wind. She was no longer a condemned witch, no longer merely the silent, limping girl. She was a survivor, guided by a warrior, stepping onto a new path, into a destiny forged in the crucible of despair and delivered by a shadow in the dawn. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with unseen dangers, but for the first time in a long, dark while, Ayana felt the gentle, insistent stirrings of life, a quiet blossom unfurling in the vast, wild heart of the world.